Great. Hello, everyone. Just getting ready to start here. We're sending our data and waiting for one last platform to come on. Should happen any second now. And waiting for one last platform to come on. Should happen any second now. And waiting for one last platform to come on.
Wait a minute.
Should happen any second now. And waiting for one last platform to come on.
Wait a minute.
Should happen any second now. And waiting for one last platform to come on.
Wait a minute.
Should happen any second now. Waiting for one last platform to come on. Good. Ay. That was too much. Okay, so I think we're all online now, finally. Yes, good. Okay, welcome. So this is episode 7 of the Deep Dives. Today, going to look at a track called For My Heaven, the second track on the album. And for those of you who may be, those of you who may be unfamiliar with the track, let's just give it a little bit to get it in your ears. This is a bit of For My Heaven.
See the moon reflected in her eye. Feel the rhythm of the ocean's push and pull. Feel the part of something beautiful.
There you go, get a sense of it. So it's a fairly lush production number, and but the song didn't begin that way. The way the song began was actually, I was teaching a songwriting class at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and in preparation for that, I was going to show my students how Joni Mitchell used altered tunings to come up with sort of her harmonic vocabulary, and that she would change the tunings to sort of simplify what her fingers would do on the fretboard, but the tunings would create types of chord voicings that might not otherwise really be accessible to a guitarist. So a lot of her music uses the same tuning, and I found that tuning and was preparing to show students how it worked, and I got an idea. My fingers started leading me to a pattern. And so very, very quickly, the musical, or at least the center of this song, kind of came from that. And I'll give you a sense of just what that pattern is. Let's just go back to this top of the song. And this is the guitar part as I kind of wrote it. So it's kind of a hypnotic little pattern that circles in and of itself, just keeps going. Eventually, to get into the chorus, I do change the chords, but the bulk of the verses are just that sort of back and forth between the two. It kind of created its own little mood right in itself. So that's the basis for the verses of the song, and then the chorus changes feel, but the guitar pattern actually stays the same. So let's see, I can find a little visual cue for where the chorus happens by looking at other tracks that happen later in the song. Bound to see something sometime. There we go. So here's where that same guitar part changes to become the chorus. Okay. So you see the two different sections of the song, but that essentially the kind of picking pattern is the same. There are some meager changes that happen in there because there always are in my music. Okay, that's the basic song, but the final result really only starts from there. So when I went around to begin seriously producing the track, I decided I wanted something that was going to be very lush. And the Joni Mitchell inspiration, not only for the tuning and the guitar picking part, I also sort of began to reference some of her recordings from the late 80s, early 90s when she was working with Larry Klein producing. They would create much lusher versions, often with multiple tracks of her guitar playing. So if we go back to the beginning of the song, what I ended up doing, you'll see here in these two tracks, what we've been listening to, are a left and right guitar miking of my guitar. But then I overdubbed left and right guitar mics, two pairs of them. So in the end, we have a centerpiece that's stereo pan just as if I performed it. But then I take one set of mics and pan them over to the left, one set of mics and pan them over to the right. So we actually end up on the record hearing three performances of the same part. So here's all 6 tracks, all 3 parts, all 3 performances, I should say. Let's compare that to just the initial stereo version, and you can hear maybe what the difference is. I'll add in the left channel additional guitars. Here's the right channel added in. These are the overdubbed left and rights without the center. Everything in. So musically, there's no new information there. It really is, again, just about overdubbing to change the timbre. You get sort of weird phase relations. You start to hear kind of a swirling on the top, as it were. This part is not particularly difficult to play, so I'm not going, oh my goodness, what a great guitar player. He's able to triple track himself and not have lots of flams and mistakes. For me, it was just easy to play, and the sound that 3 guitars created got me a lot of the ways towards the lushness that I was hoping for in the end. You're also probably noticing that there's some processing going on. There's definitely a long reverberation program. I'm going to play the track and then stop it. You'll hear the reverb tail, as it were. And I'm not sure what degree you can hear this at home, but in my headphones, it's still going. So it's quite a lush, long, messy, blurry kind of picture that we create that way. Okay, that's the bulk of the song from an instrumental point of view. I brought in Greg Porter to play bass, and let's see, it might be just easier to do it this way. If we go to solo that in, I'll bring the bass in. Now, you may notice in the balance of things, the bass might actually feel like it's a little loud. That's because, of course, there's going to be other instrumentation in the final mix. But this is the bass and the acoustic guitar. So the bass doesn't really do anything other than give me the fundamental that I'm also playing on my guitar. It's not a big flowing fluid part. And Greg's totally happy with just playing the fundamentals if that's all that's really necessary. And that's sort of creating the tapestry. The whole bed of the song really is that. Okay. Next thing, though, is I brought in Thomas Giuliano to play guitar. And Thomas then brings that sense of organic maybe commentary. So he plays things, he might play some of the same ideas repeatedly throughout the song, but there's a flow, emotion. It's not just repeating a cycle. So I'll add Thomas in. You can hear what he's doing. Again, it's additive. There's something new happening, but it's not particularly drawing your attention to it. And that's because both Greg and Thomas are letting the vocal take the center stage. In some ways, by creating this sort of repetitive guitar loop, you create a bed of sound, and then the voice becomes the only thing that's changing within that bed. So that's where the song begins and ends. Let's get into that. So the vocal treatment. As I developed a more lusher version of the approach to the production, I also decided to treat the voice a little differently. I'll go back to the top of this. Let's see what's happening in the voice. So a couple of things are going on in the way that I've recorded this. Let's find it here. Yeah. Okay. So, as before on many of the other tracks for this album, I've done my usual thing of having this track, the original vocal through the verse. I duplicate that track and then do my compression, high EQ peak to bring out the clarity in the voice. So there's basically these two tracks here are the same performance. They're just being treated differently in the mix. But in addition to that, I have another vocal performance here, the double. So it's in fact a double-tracked vocal. Let's start by just hearing the initial vocal.
I would trade 100 days to come.
I'm going to roll that back and get rid of the little help that compression frequency peak is giving me.
I would trade 100 days to come.
Now on its own, without all the other guitars, that's perfectly audible. But I think you might be able to imagine what bringing that compression peak does to clarity.
I would trade 100 days to come.
The T's, the C's, they come through a little more. You even hear the breath in the voice a little more as a result of that. Okay. Now that's the voice. There's some reverb happening on it. But what really gets messy is when we get to the double track voice, and you'll hear why. So here are both vocal takes, the original and the double track.
I would trade 100 days to come for a moment's equilibrium.
Now you can still hear all that stuff going on. That's basically because I've set this up so that the vocal double, here, is actually triggering an additional delay. So in addition to the reverb that it's being fed into, it's feeding this repeating loop delay. Let me take that off for a second. We can hear the double track, but without the delay feed.
A moment's equilibrium.
Let's roll back and hear it with the delay feed. And you'll be surprised at just how much delay there is. It really is present and it keeps going. It's also bouncing around in stereo.
For a moment's equilibrium. For a place where I could hide my face and cry.
All right. Now that's a little bit too much soup, but for me, that's not even enough soup. Part of this is, again, I was referencing Joni Mitchell, late 80s, early 90s. Another record that I'm referencing in the mix is Roxy Music's Avalon. And the way that Brian Ferry's voice is treated on some of those mixes was particularly instructive. I'm into 5-to-1 surround, for those of you who don't know. And one of my templates was listening to a surround sound mix of Avalon. And I was able to select, well, I don't want to hear what is happening in the rear channels, what's happening in the center channel, etc. And what I discovered was that there were enormous amounts of delays being put on Brian Ferry's vocal, but only assigned to the rear channels. When you hear everything all at once, it's kind of hard to tell what's happening, but because I could isolate speakers, I could tell there were quite a few delays going on, and that is part of what created the more ethereal placement of his vocal. So that's what I decided to do. Delays, but even then that wasn't enough for me. So I decided to, let's see if we can see it here. I took my performance and then ran that through another set of reverberations. Let's see, I'll just solo the re-recording of the vocal with reverb. Not very loud in the mix, but it's predominantly reverberation. The next thing was a same version, re-recording of the vocal, only now with delays. You can put those together, the additional reverbs, additional delays, and we'll talk about why you can barely hear them in a second. One way to think of it is if you look here, you can see at this point, this is where the vocal the main vocal that we're listening to begins. But you'll notice there's all this information here and that it's actually earlier. It's happening before the vocal. That's why they're actually re-recorded. It's taking this sound that's being fed to delays and reverbs, recording that, but then bringing it early so that it anticipates what I say. So rather than having an echo that follows what I say, now the echo happens before I say it. So here's the processed vocals with the anticipated effects.
For a moment's equilibrium, for a place where I could hide my face and cry, for a place where I could learn to smile.
Okay. So that's really obscuring the voice in many ways. And it's meant to sit in that bed of guitars as this dream sphere treatment. All right, well, that's all well and good. That's the verses, and a lot of the feel of the verses right there, even in the vocal treatment, but certainly between the voices and the guitars. But once I decided to get to the chorus, which does have a harmonic change, I also wanted it to change rhythmically. So the processing disappears during the chorus. And in fact, I had to take my vocal and treat it differently in the chorus than I had during the verse. So here's what happens to my vocal in the chorus.
Love you, from my heaven I will love you. From my heaven I will love you.
It still has reverbs and delays, but not any of that pre-delay, pre-reverb. It's not a double-tracked vocal. It's got a little more focus. And that's because I decided to create a whole bed of harmony vocals for this section. So if we listen to just the chorus, but listen to the chorus with all of the, and you can see me unmuting all of these voices, this is what the chorus is vocally.
Love you, From my heaven I will love you. From my heaven I will love you. From my
Okay. So while I have a lush amount of voices happening, they're a little more rhythmically in time, and we don't have a lot of delays and such. There's a little delay on the lead vocal part. The rest of the parts do not have that. Why don't we just sort of see what these parts are doing? I've divided them into lows and highs, and I think these are all the same parts. I'll be curious to find out. Let's take these 1, 2, 3s and see what they sound like on their own.
love you,
Yeah, same part, only 3 voices.
love you, love.
And that's actually a double of what I'm doing in the lead vocal, I believe. So you'll hear the lead vocal with those folks. And then, of course, he fills out the phrase.
Love
Yeah.
you.
So no chords here.
From my heaven I will love you.
There's 4 voices doing love you, but it's the same pitch, so it's almost hard to tell that there's 4 of them. But we can flesh out that chord. I'll take the lead vocal out with what I call low. And again, 3 voices doing the low. Let's hear what that sounds like on its own, and then I'll add them together. Here are the low voices.
Love you.
Predictable, yes?
Love you.
And in the panning, I have 1 hard left, 1 hard right, and 1 more in the center.
Love you.
If you're listening with headphones, you can hear that different placement. If you're not listening with headphones, maybe you would still have a sense of a more enveloping kind of sound. So the initial part, which is sort of a mirroring of the lead vocal plus the lower harmony.
Love you. Love you.
Now, of course, in the mix, because I have the lead vocal muted right now, the low parts seem to be coming through louder than the lead vocal part. When you put the lead vocal in, they're more equally balanced. But then I've got this high part, high 1 and 2. And it's kind of curious to me, I did not do a triple track of this. This is just 1 and 1. And I will perhaps embarrass myself, but let's go ahead, why not? Here are the high parts only.
Love you.
It doesn't do anything, it's static.
Love you.
Now you remember there was another track that we were looking at where I noted in a lot of harmony vocal, especially 3-part singing, you often will have 2 voices doing a lot of movement, but another part that's more static so that the things move around it. And that's sort of the function of this part in relation to the others. So this would be the chord that they all create. And I'll play all the vocals, including the lead vocal. Again, the chorus.
Love you. From my heaven I will love you. From my heaven I will love you.
Okay. That's a little bit punchy, and that's fine. But that's really just a warm-up for the next section. And I have that assigned to different sets of tracks because there's a different set of harmonic function that's about to happen. Let me just, for no reason other than cleanliness, unsolo these tracks. At the chorus, or the sort of the section that happens following the chorus, a transition between chorus and verse, is a vocal thing that as soon as I sang one moment of this while I was writing the song, I knew I was going to create a big vocal bed of harmony. Let's hear the whole thing, and then we'll break down how it's actually working. So in the guitar part, the chords change underneath this moment, and you'll hear them vocally being echoed. So here's the vocal section at the end of the chorus.
From my heaven I will love you.
Okay, that's a lot of oohs. Um, yeah, I think what I've done is pretty much my typical approach so that we have double tracked vocals on each part. So 2 voices per part, generally panned opposite. So there's sort of like one little quartet in one channel, another quartet in the other. But let's break this down a little bit. You may notice especially why the gap here. Why is there nothing happening here? And that's because, as we'll see, I created almost a round so that the vocal stack begins low and continues to rise up. And that means that the harmonies start to rise up. There's a hole left for the bottom note. So tracks, what's labeled here as track harmony vocal 5 and 6, they come in to fill in the gap once the initial chord is moved up. So let's see. How can we explain this a little more clearly? Let's take a listen to what's happening in the first 2 parts.
Love you.
Static like we had in the earlier chorus. Now they're going to move. And they're going to keep moving up. Okay. And again, apologies for my computer processor, little pops and clicks here and there. Let's hear that in relation to the lead vocal. So you hear, is that harmony or is it support?
My heaven, I will love you.
Total doubling of the vocal, the lead vocal part. So that keeps the melody a little more on top of the rest of the mix as a result of that. I'm going to mute the lead vocal now since it's not really giving us new harmonic information, and instead see what the next part's doing.
Love you.
So you remember the initial harmony part, I'll play it again just to get it back in our heads, is static to begin with, same note. Love and the U will be the same pitch, right? And then it begins its more melodic movement. Now the bottom part, or the part below it at least, moves from the get-go because it's part of a set of chord changes.
Love you.
And they're going to continue moving in that kind of pattern. Basically, they are a third below the melody part. And as those thirds move up, they move up kind of in tandem. So we'll hear that, just those 2 parts together.
Love you.
Okay. On top of all that is another part, an upper part, that's above the melody, above the harmonies that are below it. And that eventually the melody comes to take over and do its part.
Love you.
Here it is. So just on its own, the high part. A little more static, but with some movement. I noticed that one of those voices had to take a little breath in the middle. So be it. All right, so the three harmonies together would be this. Okay, so why this part? Why this delayed entrance? Well, let's just hear it on its own. You'll note, of course, that it's delayed, as we say. It starts here, low. Well, what is that? That's actually the same thing that parts 3 and 4 are doing a few bars earlier. Now they're going to start on the same pitch here. If I took that 2 bars earlier and soloed the earlier parts, we would hear the same thing. So this is the round effect, parts echoing and coming in. Why do it? Well, it's because as those parts get up there, we lose that pitch. We lose that fundamental that's supporting everything. So I decided to go ahead and add that, even though it's a delayed entrance, because I was missing hearing that underneath. So all together now with the lead vocal, here's all that harmonic vocal stack.
For my heaven I will love you.
Frankly, it's just fun to do that. So, if you've got a microphone and a recording device, it's tempting for me to always create these lush harmony vocals. And this was a song that I felt like maybe deserved it. So I did. I liked what it did because it kept the 2-chord back and forth thing there, but it introduced a little more movement within it and around it. Okay, so that's one chunk of sound. Basically, so far we've had 2 types of chunks of sound. There have been the guitars, triple-tracked acoustic guitars with bass and electric guitar comment, very lush. There's been the vocal, which sometimes has a lot of processing during the verses to create all sorts of interest and stuff. And then during this post-chorus moment, lots of vocal harmony stack, so a big chunk of vocal sound. Well, the next big chunk of sound is not unheard of for me, and that is some string parts. So let's see where those all are. Here we are. Our usual approach to recording the orchestra, double tracking essentially a 10-piece string section, 6 violin, 2 viola, 2 cello. And they don't really begin until this vocal stack. The same section we've just been listening to is where the strings make their entrance. But they don't do very much. I sneak the strings in so that your ear theoretically is more hearing that vocal stack than you are necessarily noting that the strings have come in. Nonetheless, here's the string part. So that's happening underneath that vocal stack. Very static, not a lot of movement going on because the vocals are supplying that. But at this point in the song, it's time for the solo. And instead of having, another guitar solo or a piano or trumpet or something, I decided to let the orchestra take the solo. So I wrote a solo for the orchestra. And I'd left this big block in the song. I'm going to fill it with an orchestra. But what am I going to fill it? What am I going to have them do? I was on the big island of Hawaii, taking a drive with friends up and over the Saddle Road. I was in the back seat with this song in my head, trying to figure out what am I going to do? If you've ever been to the big island of Hawaii, it is predominantly two large volcanic peaks. There are other volcanoes as well on the island, but two ones, Mauna Loa, Mauna Kea. And the Saddle Road, as you can imagine, rides between them. So as you're in the car, you can look over and see one and look over and see the other. And I really thought about that duality, the two peaks, imagining sound that might bounce off one into the other. So I decided to write a melody line for the string players that would kind of include its little echoes. Since there's been so much processing on the vocals, you might assume it's done with delays and such, but I actually just had them play it loud and then a little less loud and then a little less loud still. So here is the solo section, and I think you can hear how that's been scored. It's a little solo unto itself, right? It's fun to write that stuff out. To the string player's credit, because I've written this in a meter of 7, some of the rhythmic stuff actually requires very strange looking notation on the paper, lots of additional ties and such. So it's not an easy thing to read. When you play it, it actually doesn't sound that complicated, but up against the 7/8, it's a little bit messy. That's what happens when musicians who aren't necessarily string players think about sound differently than a string player might. So anyway, that's the string section playing its solo. Now, I decided to build on that arrangement as the song progresses. So it comes back in halfway through the last verse to add a little comments. It's not much, but there's some sound here. Now you can tell that we have gotten ready for another musical moment. This would be this chorus, as it were. And the chorus is meant to be a juxtaposition. So we haven't listened to all the parts yet, but it becomes a little more rhythmically precise. So a lot of percussion. And I decided to have the strings fit into that bed of percussion, at least to begin with pizzicato playing. Pizzicato is when you pluck the string rather than bow the string. This is what the orchestra sounds like playing pizzicato passages in the second chorus. Now it's a repeat chorus. So we've gotten some percolating string parts in all that percussion. Then I have some of the strings play a little more legato lines with their bow. Other strings are still keeping the pizzicato going. Okay. So I've thought of strings during the chorus as being basically another percussion element. So that's all the pizzicato parts. At this point in the song, though, the strings become part of the vocal. And to illustrate that, let me just play you what happens in the strings and then play you the strings with the vocals. I think you'll know the section we're at. This is what the strings are doing. So that's that same vocal build. This time the strings are there supplying similar information, but they are in fact echoing. So just as I had sort of a pre-echo on the verses, now we have an echo, a response to the vocal swell with the strings. So let's hear the voices and the strings at this section. Functioning, as I would say, is sort of in tandem, but one answers responds to the other.
From my heaven I will love you.
Yeah. So they work in tandem, but not exactly the same. Again, a large chunk of sound nonetheless. And that's the song, except it isn't. So the one thing that I haven't really played for you is the percussion. I had Ben Whitman play percussion rather than drum kit. I knew from the outset that I wanted something that was more sort of hand-oriented, that might be more cyclical, so you just get a certain pattern going and let it continue throughout the song, or at least through large sections of the song, rather than have drum fills and big crashes, etc. So I just said to Ben, throw some percussion on this thing. And I knew what he would do, and he did not disappoint. So Ben went about it by himself. It sounds like several people playing at once, but of course it's Ben overdubbing himself. He sent me a whole bunch of tracks, and I added them into the mix, and then decided which ones maybe I would use, which ones maybe I would not use. I used most of them, but I didn't use a couple. So let's hear what Ben's percussion stuff sounds like. I can play you a little bit of what might be happening under verses, and then you'll hear it change at the chorus. So here comes the percussion.
For a place where I could hide my face.
He's got a shaker going on all the way through down here. That big bombo bass drum kind of sound. And then more hand drums in the middle here. Every once in a while, he'll add a cymbal roll. But more stuff is about to happen. When we get to the choruses, he introduces a new groove underneath that. The shaker never stops. Things come in, claps, a triangle. Now, that's really cool, but it may sound a little lopsided. Something's going on wrong there. Well, it's because of my weird metrical nature. The chorus alternates between 4 and 7. Haha. So it means that he's playing something that's very symmetrical, and then it has to jump, and then be asymmetrical, and then jump again. Ben can do it in a way that makes it feel, when it's in the music bed, very organic. But when you isolate it, it definitely sounds like, did he forget something? Is something not happening correctly there? I did add to what Ben gave me this kick drum sample that's labeled here. For example, once I had the chorus and everything in, I realized I needed just a little more punch. So I took a recording of his kick drum from another song, haha, and flew it in and just dropped it in where I wanted it. So that's what the bump, ba-bump, bump, ba-bump, bump, ba-bump. So Ben, if you're out there, sorry, I did that. Okay, lots of fun things to listen to. He did give me wind chimes for some reason over here that I elected not to use. I don't know where they happen occasionally. If you're curious about what wind chimes sound like, I'm sure you're not that curious, but they would have included something like this. And that's all well and good. No real harm there. But for me, that felt a little bit like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or something. Let's go to the land of make-believe. So I left it out. There's also a sound in here, hooves, which are exactly what you think they are. And this is interesting because it's a sound that a number of people have used, especially some Brazilian musicians. I remember Ben really being into Hermeto Pascoal, who would always have these things in there. They sound like this. Hooves that have been strung together. I have told Ben in the past I don't really like that sound. And yet, when I put it into the whole mix, I really liked the way it was working. So Ben had his way this time. At any rate, let me go back to just quickly solo up the percussion. Because what I realized when I talk about beds of sound, as I was thinking about the mix, I sort of built an assemblage of Ben's tracks and said, okay, that feels good. It's got some stereo placement. There's some effects on some things. And it provides a really nice underpinning of rhythm. But the more I listened to it in solo mode, the more I was like, this is so great, but I can't hear it with all my guitars. And so I got really into this idea that maybe a song that began absolutely about the guitars, that guitar pattern, oops, there I was just there. The guitar pattern is what is the reason the song exists, right? If we just... But once I went and soloed up the percussion, there were so many more interesting things to listen to that I decided maybe I would create an alternative mix of this song. And instead of featuring the guitars, the whole foundation of the song, instead I would mute the guitars and mute the bass, so that all that we would hear would be the percussion, the vocals, and the strings.
Trade 100 starlit dreams for a moment of awakening. Lying naked in the summer sun and see. Feel the warmth of love wash
And so a new idea, a different interpretation of the same song, of in fact the same recording, but with a very different emphasis. If by pulling out the guitars, there's a different kind of propulsion, a different kind of juxtaposition of the intimacy of the vocal now, not supported by guitars, but rather just holding its own, surrounded by all this percolating percussion. I really loved it. And I loved it so much that we have decided to issue it as a standalone single, and it's just come out, I think, this past Friday. So if you're interested, you can go out to all your favorite streaming platforms and find this song. The song is called For My Heaven, the Fretless Mix. And it's not a fretless bass, i.e. Jaco Pastorius or something, but rather none of the instruments with frets, guitars, are in the mix. And also sort of like maybe like no worries, no fretting, a different kind of approach to the song. So check it out, For My Heaven, the Fretless Mix, or check out the original For My Heaven on the Currents album if you'd like. And I think we'll just wrap it up for today's deep dive. Thanks for tuning in. A little bit of exposure about how I think about stacking all these parts against one another. And this is one of my favorite mixes of the album just because it's so lush and full of sound, even though when we really look at it, there's only a handful of things going on. It's just it's a very full handful, okay? Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you hopefully next week on another deep dive. Take care, everyone.